Warning! Kinda Murdery contains adult themes, explicit language, and descriptions of violence. It is not suitable for anyone, and we recommend you stop listening now.
True crime with a dash of the paranormal, the garish, the strange, and the darkly comic. I'm Zevin Odelberg, and you've found your way to Kinda Murdery, a place that means more than just murder. It's my very own pocket dimension, home to a curated collection of bizarre and compelling stories, the unsolved, the unsettling, and the unbelievable. I cover it all, just so long as it's kinda murdery. Hey everybody, welcome to Kinda Murdery. I'm your host, Zevin Odelberg. Thank you for deciding to spend a little of your precious time with me. We did it. We made it to the thrilling conclusion of Killer Couple Natural Born Lovers, Dale Jones and Marjie Dean. Now, first of all, this is Killer Couple Natural Born Lovers Part 3, so before you continue listening, please make sure you've already listened to Parts 1 and 2. It'd be a shame to spoil your dinner with dessert before you've had a chance to voraciously consume the appetizers and the entree. Am I wrong? Of course I'm not. So go suck down Parts 1 and 2 if you haven't, and if you have, then you're ready. And I'm ready. We're all ready. As I always do, I'll rewind the story just slightly to allow you to settle in. Alright folks, it's time to make like beloved Eddie Munson. Let's meddle. Kinda Murdery starts now. The policeman watched Eva Lewis and Cheryl walk from the house and get in a car parked at the curb. Still, the officers waited. In about 5 minutes, Frank Lewis came out of the house and started for the machine occupied by his sister and Cheryl. The police opened fire. Cheryl, sitting at the wheel, pressed the starter and the motor roared. He let the machine into gear and steered the car at a breakneck speed through a convenient alley, the only avenue of escape not barred by police officers. Eva lost her hat when the automobile lunged violently forward in high gear. Cheryl drove with one hand and fired over his shoulder with the other. Eva did not carry a gun. When the car in which the bandit and cabaret singer were speeding to safety disappeared down the alleyway, several of the officers started in pursuit. Others remained at the scene of the shooting to determine the number of casualties, if any. There were 2. Detectives Harry Lane and Frank Cole had been hit by bullets from Cheryl's gun. Eva and Cheryl eluded their pursuers, but every road leading out of Denver was manned by National Guardsmen who had orders to shoot to kill. The car in which Eva Lewis and Cheryl rode was riddled with bullet holes. A great number of shots were fired after the fleeing bandit and the pretty girl with him when they dashed away from the house in Denver. One bullet had struck the motor, and Cheryl was having trouble in keeping his lead over the carloads of officers that were in hot pursuit of him. He was determined to get a fresh car at the first opportune moment, and he got his chance just as he reached the city limits. Looking down the road, Cheryl saw a large automobile approaching. It looked to be a good substitute for the peppered machine he drove. Not only did it look like an excellent automobile to trade to Cheryl, but sitting beside the driver of the other vehicle was a woman. She was wearing a hat, and Eva Lewis needed a hat. Cheryl pulled directly across the road, forcing the other driver to bring his car to a halt. The couple was held up and their motor car confiscated. The bandits climbed in the new machine with the man and the woman, who were W.D. Otter and a young woman from Texas. By a strange piece of luck, the bandits circled the outer edges of the city and found a lonely road over which there was very little travel. Cheryl turned into it. He drove for several miles until he arrived at a lonely schoolhouse and pulled into the schoolyard. Getting out of the car, Cheryl tried to enter the building and found all the doors and windows bolted. He had intended to lock the couple, whose motor car he had stolen, into the schoolhouse. No dice. The hands and feet of the man and his girl companion from Texas were tied with a wire, and they were left in the schoolyard. They were robbed of all money and valuables. Eva had not forgotten the hat. She removed the one worn by the woman as the latter lay helpless on the damp ground. When Otter and the girl were found the next day, they told the police that Eva Lewis had said, after Cheryl finished the tying of the victim's hands and feet, "Just shoot him and get him out of the way." It was now growing very dark, and the road he had chosen had come to an abrupt end, so Cheryl headed the stolen car back toward the city. That end of the road nearest Denver, however, was now being watched by National Guardsmen. Nearing the city limits, where he was forced to drive slowly because of the unimproved condition of the road, Cheryl suddenly heard a sharp command to halt. The command came from the direction of a clump of trees just off the road. The voice had a ring in it that sounded military. Cheryl halted. The robber climbed out of the car and, stumbling over a fence, walked toward the clump of trees from which the command had come. He walked with his hands elevated above his head. Reaching a small clearing between the fence and the trees shielding the guardsmen, Cheryl stopped short when another command rang out. "Stop right there! "Now lie down on the ground," the voice commanded. Cheryl obeyed. He could do nothing else. Eva Lewis had started to follow Cheryl, but defiant returned to the car and stood in front of the headlamps. "Come on out," came the voice from the trees. "Come and get me," the cabaret singer challenged. "Not on your life," the guardsman replied. "Come out or I'll shoot you dead in your tracks," he ordered. Eva went. It was pitch dark, and having already received word of the bloody Colorado Springs gun battle, the guardsmen were reluctant to advance on their prisoners, both of whom were lying flat on the ground in the little clearing. They waited, therefore, for the dawn. With the first gray streaks that ushered in a new day, the guardsmen made out the two prisoners stretched out full length on the wet grass. The bandits were ordered to rise and hold up their hands. Eva obeyed, but Cheryl made no effort to do as he was told. When the captors walked over to where Cheryl lay and grasped the bandit roughly by the collar, they discovered Cheryl could not stand even had he cared to. He had been shot 3 times in the knee, all 3 bullets entering almost the exact same place. Back in Denver at the time Cheryl and Eva escaped in the motor car, when the officers attempted to capture the bandits, Frank Lewis had made a successful dash for liberty. When Cheryl drove the car through the small alley, every officer on the ground had trained his gun on the machine. Taking advantage of the opportunity, Lewis ran back into the house and out the rear door, which was left unguarded during the efforts to stop Cheryl. Lewis went to a rent-car garage and hired a machine with a chauffeur. He directed the driver to head for Colorado Springs. Several miles outside of Denver, National Guardsmen stopped Frank's car but permitted the driver to proceed with his passenger when Lewis succeeded in making them all believe that he was a salesman from Colorado Springs. Frank Lewis then went to Topeka, Kansas, where he was arrested on October 2, 1918, by Chief Deputy United States Marshal C.C. Jackson. Lewis was lodged in the Shawnee County Jail at Topeka, where he died in his cell on October 16th, having contracted pneumonia while camping in the woods near Topeka prior to his capture. Dale Jones, having made good his escape from both the police of Colorado Springs and the Colorado State Patrolmen, and having slipped through the net spread over the highways by the National Guardsmen, drove to the house in Denver in which Lewis, his sister, and Cheryl had been surprised by the police. Dale, Blackie Lancaster, and Marjie Dean entered the house to find it empty. They were barely inside when someone shouted at them from the yard. Marjie went to the door, and Dale and Blackie hid behind the door facings, one on either side of the girl. A man walked up to the door and asked Marjie a question. She backed farther into the room, which was in darkness. Jones stepped out of the shadows and pressed a gun in the newcomer's stomach. "Hands up," the bandit commanded. "But I'm Ryan, Officer Ryan," the man at the door explained quickly, thinking Jones was a Pinkerton detective left to guard the house. Ryan and Patrolman Harry Wilson had been stationed at the house to watch for the possible return of any of the gang. Wilson, who was on the other side of the house when Ryan started to enter, heard the voices and hurried to the front door. He took one step toward the porch and reached for his gun. A shot was fired from the house, and Wilson dropped his revolver. One of his fingers also fell to the ground. Blackie Lancaster was taking no chances with murder when wounding would serve the same purpose. "Now hands up," Jones commanded sharply. The officers complied. Ryan and Wilson were relieved of their firearms and shoved into the darkened house. For the second time that night, Dale, Blackie, and Marjie succeeded in slipping through the guardsmen and drove back to Kansas City. They went directly to 1904 Montgall Avenue. Here, the trio of hunted bandits lay in hiding until September 24th. But Dale Jones could not remain shut up in a house with all the blinds down. And besides, he saw an opportunity to shake Kansas City Blackie, whom Dale had always considered a detriment rather than an aid in his own career as the most outstanding criminal of the age. So Jones borrowed Marjie Dean's dress, the only one she had, and stole cautiously out of the house to a nearby community grocery store. Here, he found a telephone and got Chief Gent on the wire. Sheesh. Dale never misses an opportunity to put on a dress. You have to wonder if his criminal lifestyle was driven by deeply repressed gender identity issues. I mean, who knows? I don't know if he was ever psychologized, but my goodness. Every time he's holed up in a house for a few days, he needs to dress up like a woman and go out and tweak the police. So anyhow, he gets Chief Gent on the wire. "How bad do you want Dale Jones?" the bandit leader asked Chief Gent. "Damn bad," Gent replied, all ears. "Well, you can find him at 1904 Montgall Avenue." And so, Dale Jones the Terror gave up to the law that he hated, the last member of his once notorious gang. The house on Montgall was surrounded, but before the officers arrived, Jones had returned the dress to Marjie, who went to bed while Dale was telephoning, and advised her of what he had done. Jones and Marjie slipped out the back way, took the car, and escaped, leaving Kansas City Blackie Lancaster to his own fate. With him, Dale Jones took $40,000, the savings from his years of crime. 3 officers were sent to the front of the house. They were Captain William Weibold, Lieutenant William Tobiner, and William J. Carroll, a patrolman. Wow, tale of 3 Willies here. Blackie was on the first floor when the officers started toward the front door. Bolting the doors and windows on the first floor, Blackie ran upstairs and stationed himself at a window. On the floor beside him lay 2 high-powered rifles and 4 revolvers, all fully loaded with 100 additional rounds of ammunition at his feet. Blackie was ready. The first man to come in range of his guns was Weibold. The officer received a bullet in the back, but the wound did not prove fatal. That shot was the signal for the opening of the most spectacular gun battle Kansas City has ever witnessed, or probably will ever witness. For 2 long hours, the battle raged with 500 persons bombarding the house on Montgall Avenue. Officers and citizens occupied positions on every side of the house. Many were shooting from the roofs of other buildings, while others were firing from the cover of a concrete bridge nearby. Officer Tobiner attempted to climb to the roof of the porch above which Blackie was shooting from a window. He crawled within a foot of the window when Blackie discovered him. Lancaster reached around the window facing and fired point blank in the officer's face. The bullet went wild, but the gunpowder filled Tobiner's eyes, burned his face, and singed his hair. Tobiner was blinded for several days. The officer slid from the roof and was caught by several other policemen and conveyed to safety. Chief of Detectives I.B. Walston was firing from the concrete bridge using a sawed-off shotgun. Detective Harry Arthur also was firing from the cover of the same bridge. Walston was wearing a straw hat, and once during the heat of the battle he felt it struck and it almost fell off. When he removed it after the fight to mop his brow, he discovered a bullet hole through the crown. 2 hours almost to the minute had passed from the time the 3 officers walked into the yard of the house on Montgall Avenue until the last shot was fired from the second-story window. The firing now was coming only at intervals, 1 or 2 or 3 shots being fired every 30 seconds. Alright, thank you again for taking a moment to listen to the advertisements and support the brands who support Kinda Murdery. You have my sincere, or perhaps only mildly flippant, gratitude. In all seriousness, I do appreciate it. A quick reminder that I have cerebral palsy and I want Kinda Murdery to be a support community for people with disabilities. So if you or someone you know has a disability, physical or otherwise, and they need someone to talk to, please reach out to the show. kindamurdery@gmail.com or @kindamurdery on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and now TikTok. Also, I just wanted to mention again how important it is to be mindful of your mental health and to remember that you are loved. If you need support, I'm here for you. Again, reach out, kindamurdery@gmail.com or @kindamurdery on social media. And if you're in acute crisis, and please program this number into your phone, 988. That's 988 to receive suicidal, substance, or mental health-related crisis support. Thank you for letting me take a moment to talk about that. Let's move on to shout-outs. Today, I'm shouting out my latest Kinda Murdery full-color vinyl sticker requesters. Shout out to Misty Van Landingham LeBlanc and her best friend Amanda from Parkton, North Carolina. Shout out Forrest and Kimberly Green from Las Cruces, New Mexico, and shout out to Hunter Kelly and his lovely fiancée from Farmerville, Louisiana. Thank you all for listening to the show, and thank you for wanting my Kinda Murdery stickers. I'm sending you all multiples, so please hand them out. And also, everybody please leave reviews. It helps a lot. Specifically, when you leave a review, it activates the pod platform's algorithms and increases the visibility of the show, helping other people find it, growing our community, and inspiring me to keep on keeping on. All right, heavens to Betsy, folks. Let's strap into the Kinda Murdery Gravitron and spin our way back to the thrilling conclusion of Killer Couple Natural Born Lovers, Dale Jones and Marjie Dean. As always, I'll rewind the story just a bit to help you settle in to the narrative. Chief of Detectives I.B. Walston was firing from the concrete bridge using a sawed-off shotgun. Detective Harry Arthur also was firing from the cover of the same bridge. Walston was wearing a straw hat, and once during the heat of the battle he felt it struck and it almost fell off. When he removed it after the fight to mop his brow, he discovered a bullet hole through the crown. 2 hours almost to the minute had passed from the time the 3 officers walked into the yard of the house on Montgall Avenue until the last shot was fired from the second-story window. The firing now was coming only at intervals, 1 or 2 or 3 shots being fired every 30 seconds, then every minute. And finally, the guns of Lancaster were stilled altogether. Detective Arthur was one of the first to leave his post and run toward the house. Chief of Detectives I.B. Walston followed. The front door was smashed and the house was flooded with policemen. Vaulting the stairs, Chief of Detectives Walston arrived at the side of Blackie at the same time Arthur did. Lancaster was lying face down in a pool of blood that covered the floor 3 feet on either side of his body. He was still alive. Turning him on his back, Chief of Detectives Ike Walston looked down in the harsh face of Kansas City Blackie Lancaster, who was gasping away his life's last breath. With eyes that already were becoming glazed, he looked up and recognized Walston, and with lips that were streaming blood, Kansas City Blackie Lancaster spoke his last words. "Ike, damn you. You got me." 2 days later, Thomas Knight was captured in St. Louis. Shortly afterwards, Eva Lewis, who could not be connected directly with the robbery of the Missouri, Kansas, and Texas passenger train, was convicted in Denver on a charge of highway robbery in connection with the holdup of Mr. Otter. All of a sudden, it's wind in the willows here. Poor Mr. Otter. George Udeley was captured in Denver and was awaiting trial in federal court for train robbery. Roy Sherrill, taken by National Guardsmen near Denver, was in the St. Louis jail, having been transferred from Denver by the post office authorities. He also was facing trial for the robbery of the Texas Special. It was George Udeley and Roy Sherrill who gave the first detailed accounts of the operations of the great Jones-Lewis bandit gang. A little later, Harry Lancaster, the brother of the slain Kansas City Blackie Lancaster, hanged himself in the 19th Street Police Station at Kansas City. And here I'll pause to remind you, as I've done before, that if you are facing a crisis, you can dial 988 to immediately speak to someone. 988 is a new, free, 3-digit number where anyone who's facing a crisis can receive suicidal, substance use, or mental health-related support. And should your troubles not feel so acute, but if you still want someone to talk to, you can also feel free to reach out to me. That's kindamurdery@gmail.com or at kindamurdery on social media. I care. I'm happy to talk to you. Okay, let's get back to the story. Now that every other member of the terrible gang of robbers had been accounted for, where were Dale Jones and Marjie Dean? This question was being asked not only by the post office inspectors, but by the police of every city in the United States. Donaldson and Admonson, post office inspectors assigned to the task of running Dale Jones down, were not idle. I don't know why, but at this point, I pictured Donaldson and Admonson as some kind of comedic, absurdist twins who are just following the bandits around everywhere but never actually do anything. They just call the police in and wait for the police to get shot at. Then they hop back in their car. I don't know if it's Danny DeVito and Arnold Schwarzenegger or if they're identical twins, but these guys are odd to me. Anyway, they'd not been idle, these oddballs. They traced Jones back to California as they had expected he would return to the Pacific coast. But California is a big state. To say that a man is hiding in California means very little to the police and federal authorities. It was up to the post office inspectors to learn just what part of California shielded Dale Jones and his common-law wife, Marjie Dean. More circulars were distributed. Employees of the post office department saw to it that one of these was placed in every filling station, public building, and railway station in the country. R. Krebs, proprietor of a filling station on the outskirts of Arcadia, California, the town Dale Jones once said he would someday make his permanent home after he had quit the robber game, happened to get one of these circulars. He studied the poster for a long while after the man who had tacked it on the wall of his small place had gone. Less than 1 hour after the circular offering rewards totaling several $1,000s had been left in the filling station, Krebs saw a big Marmon automobile drive up. It was the one he had been fueling every few days. He walked out of his place and greeted the customers, a man and a woman. "Well, how are you today?" Krebs said. "Always glad to see a regular cash customer." "Fill her up," was the gruff reply of the man at the wheel. Krebs looked up from his work of putting oil in the motor, intending to engage the young man in conversation. His own hand, holding the oil cup, trembled, and the contents of the cup were spilled on the running board of the car. He said nothing further, but fastened down the hood over the engine and took the money offered him by his customer. Long after the car disappeared down the road, however, he was still standing in the same spot, staring after the big Marmon car. Krebs walked back into his little office and took another long look at the pictures of a man and a woman who were being sought as Dale Jones and Marjie Dean, wanted for murder and train robbery. The next day, November 19th, 1918, the big Marmon car again drove up to the front of Mr. Krebs' filling station and stopped. A very young-looking man leaned lazily on the steering wheel and gazed dreamily toward the oil station. He was patiently waiting for the attendant to come hurrying toward the car and to be greeted with the customary, "Well, how are you today?" The man in the automobile was smiling. He presented every outward indication of being contented with life and seemed to be enjoying the warm November sun of California. A very tall woman sat in the car beside him. She was not pretty or even attractive, nor did she appear to be young. Her complexion was sickly looking, and her hair was done up in a tight ball on the back of her head. She was obviously nervous. Mr. Krebs stepped from the front door of his tiny office, but instead of going toward the waiting automobile, he turned sharply to the right and hurried toward the rear of the small building and disappeared. Suddenly, two tall men appeared from behind the oil station, one on either side of the building. The eyes of both were riveted on the young man sitting in the Marmon car. Each of the newcomers held a shotgun in hands that trembled. Both spoke at once, and both spoke, or rather shouted, the same words. "We're officers! Throw up your hands!" The young man in the car obeyed. The woman did likewise. But in the upward movement of the hands of the man to whom the order had been addressed, the long, graceful fingers of the right hand were bent sharply to the left and downward. The fingers encircled the butt of an automatic pistol, and, like a thing alive, the gun leapt into sight and roared out Dale Jones' defiance to the law. Deputy Sheriff George Van Vliet, one of the officers who had appeared from the rear of the oil station, dropped in his tracks. He died almost instantly. A spray of bullets spattered around Deputy Sheriff Andy Anderson, the other officer. Then, the twin barrels of Anderson's shotgun roared, and the report drowned out the machine gun-like tattoo of the revolvers of Dale Jones and Marjie Dean. 2 hours later, newsboys on the streets of Los Angeles were yelling, "Extra, extra, read all about it!" The newspaper story, about which the newsies were shouting, read as follows. Riddled with buckshot from shoulders to the top of his head, he with part of his skull torn away, and she with a full charge in the brain. Charles Forbes, alias Dale Jones, and his consort, Margie Solano, alias Marjie Dean, are dead, their bodies lying in the Raniker Undertaking Room in Monrovia. Deputy Sheriff George Van Vliet is dead, and arrangements are being made for his funeral at his former home in Covina. This is the net result of one of the most spectacular fights with bandits ever recorded in Southern California. Private Brock of the Arcadia Balloon School, a bystander, was slightly wounded by a stray bullet and is in the hospital. And so, the story of the Southwest's worst gang of criminals ends, and the terror of terrors is no more. Over a double grave in Cavalry Cemetery on Whittier Boulevard near Montebello, California, a growth of lush green grass waves in the Pacific breeze. Underneath lie Dale Jones and Marjie Dean, buried in the same grave by the girl's mother who came all the way from Italy to see her daughter laid to rest. Wow. And there you have it. An unsurprisingly ultra-violent death for our first killer couple. Now I know, I pumped up Dale and Marjie in this episode and threw a little shade at the even more notorious Bonnie and Clyde. But if you thought that meant I could make it through a theme series called Killer Couple and not cover Bonnie and Clyde, well, you either over or underestimated me. I'm not sure which. Please tune in this Sunday, August 21st, for the second story in our Killer Couple series. Killer Couple, Wheels, Barrows, and Blood. Bonnie and Clyde. I'm Zevon Odelberg, and this has been Kinda Murdery. If you've enjoyed today's Kinda Murdery, please tell your friends and family, tell strangers, leave a review. It's the best way to ensure that I can keep telling that special brand of bizarre and terrible tales that you'll only find here on Kinda Murdery.